Welcome to Everyday Entrepreneurs Everywhere with your host, Chris Parker.
Hello, this is Chris Parker, and I'm here with Everyday Entrepreneurs Everywhere and a very special and very dear guest to me, Bill Binney. And Bill and I, with other amazing people, worked, I think back in 2018, with the ambition of enabling large-scale massive data analytics done in a way, so you could call that bulk surveillance, but please don't, but large-scale analytics done in a way which is very respectful for security and, most importantly, the right to privacy. And we did lots of projects together, and we have an architecture that we built very much based on the experience of Bill and his colleague Kirk Weeby. That is still very much applicable, and I'm sure we'll get into that during our conversation. So, Bill, thank you for joining. Thank you so much. Would you please, for everyone, tell people who you are and what do you do and why do you do it? Maybe just give them a little bit of a background, because you were with the NSA, the National Security Agency. You're a whistleblower. You're a grandfather. So who is Bill and why does Bill do what Bill does?
Well, I basically got started with NSA looking at signals intelligence, which meant cryptography, codes and ciphers and data systems and data, and then eventually into data itself, transactional data, as well as data at rest, and just massive amounts of data because they had, terabytes and terabytes, petabytes and petabytes of data. They just didn't know what to do with it all. So those were the major problems that I as a mathematician of the background, that's why I started looking at to try to figure out how to do things with data on a large scale and actually do it as much as possible without human intervention. So the humans only came in when they had to toward the end to make decisions and confirm assessments and so on. So those were that was the basic thing. I spent 32 years there, going up to being the technical director of what I like to call the world, which was the official title was the World Geopolitical and Military Analysis and Reporting Shop. So that meant everything in the world, basically.
That is everything in the world. Yeah.
So any problem, that was available there that was a problem for our analysts, and there were about 6,000 in the group that I was working on, the technical director for. So that anything that popped up there, I tried to handle and fix and make it possible for our analysts to do a little better job.
Yeah, and if I remember right, around 2001, 2002, that sort of came to an end when you choose to retire under a bit of protest. Can you share a little bit of that story? Well,
unfortunately, what I did was I built a system that was capable of monitoring the entire world. But when I did that, I built in safeguards like privacy protection, like if you were not a part of a known target or in a proximity of it under deductive, inductive, abductive rules, your data was never taken in. So NSA never had the possibility of abusing your data, and you had absolute privacy. And that was including everybody in the world. So it wasn't just the idea that if we don't take in Americans, it'll solve our problem. No, because unless you don't take in everybody in the planet, you get buried in information and you can't see any threats coming. And that's exactly what they're doing now. And that's why they're failing so miserably. And this includes the Brits and the Germans, the B&D, and all the countries affiliated with NSA and the Five Eyes. They're all falling apart because of that problem. They just can't see the threats coming. They're too buried. That was our whole objective right up front. But they removed that in favor of they removed that filtering process in favor of taking in all the data. So in order to assess whether or not you want to take something in, you have to first be able to see it and say, do I want this, yes or no? Well, that gave them the opportunity of removing that filter and then just let everything come in. So that meant that everything in the world then just dumped into their coffers, into their data storage, and they had data on everybody on the planet. And then, of course, after that, we had another thing, which was encryption of the attributes of people, so you couldn't tell who they were if you took them in and you didn't know them, they were a target. So That way we develop the probable cause and then go after a warrant and then target them. And the final one, which is the real killer for them, they didn't want this one at all. This was the auditing of the log, of the network log for our program, which meant anybody coming in to our system, wherever they went, whatever they did, everything would be recorded and assessed as they did it, not after the fact. This is online, real-time software looking at all these network logs around the world.
Yeah.
And they didn't want to do that. They didn't want anybody to know that, because that would tell Congress or anybody else that coming in saying, give us this information, here it is. They would say, here's all the programs we have that are failing miserably, and here's what it's costing you, and here's how we're wasting money, and here's the transfer of money that you allocated us to do this job, but we used it to do another job. All these kinds of under-the-table shenanigans that were going on, all of those would be openly and exposed. Well, and they didn't want any of that. So they got rid of all that stuff, took in everything, and that's the state of affairs now.
You said in the past to me, maybe jokingly, that if they had, maintained the system as you had designed it and implemented it, then they would have prevented Edward Snowden from,
That's right.
getting away with his payload. How would that have been?
Because it's, the auditing program, looking at the network log, would see him send instructions to download a file.
Yeah.
And as he did that, we would see that. And after he kept doing so many files, we would send up alerts. Oh, you're not supposed to do this, okay?
So maybe
within a few seconds, we could have got him. Yeah.
So maybe a trick question, because you, and let's not go into that whole story, because there's movies about that. A Good American is a movie about that. I'll put that in the show notes as well. You, with your conscience, turned whistleblower, however, never gave any material or evidence, because that would have been illegal. And if there's one thing I've learned about Bill Binney, law and constitution is paramount. So my trick question is, are you happy that Edward did what he did?
Yeah, because it allowed me to talk very specifically about all the programs I left at NSA. Because he had them all in the documentation. The whole program was basically designed by the SARC and me and others people in the SARC.
Yeah, I think if the timeline is still with me, I was around 2007 that I think you and a group of people from the intelligence community went public after the government attacked you. Again, it's all in the movie, so let's not go there. But then in 2013, I think Snowden released his material. And basically that just confirmed everything you had been saying. But then now people had the actual documentation. I have read the book Edward Snowden with his own biography, and he names you as an inspiration. So, how does that feel?
Well, I mean, I didn't feel like I was doing anything other than what I should do as a citizen of the United States, to protect and defend the constitutional rights of everyone, not just U.S. citizens, by the way.
Yeah. So, in 2017 or so, we through a series of fortunate events, we started a company, Pretty Good Knowledge, with a corporate sponsor, and you were flying over to Europe basically every other month, just driven to help organizations and help leaders of organizations successfully manage their data, like you just described. Automation, with auditing, with controls. We did a lot of interesting projects, insurance companies, banks, a division of the Dutch government. However, we never were able to find a customer group that could really adopt it. We haven't had this conversation yet, so I'm really curious. Why do you think PGK didn't work within that year?
I think it's pretty simple. I look at it very, very, very simple. You have all these guys out there selling this Palantir and other kinds of products out there. Yeah. And you go around and talk to your customers, and they keep saying, or you're tempted to get customers, and they say, well, all the stuff that we get didn't work at all. Well, so what that simply means is they've been sold a bill of goods by a bunch of snake oil salesmen.
Yeah.
And here we are, it's just another snake oil salesman coming along down the road. So why should we believe you? Now we tried to do, like we tried to say, well, we'll give it to you after we develop it, so, it'll be yours and so on. Trying to get past that, the characterization of anybody coming to anybody in the data business with a new solution, a new tool that'll solve your problems. That's like, I've heard this story before, I'm hearing it again. And so they've been conditioned to be sensitized to that thought. And their experience is telling them that's what's going on. For sure, that's true. That's why they tried to keep us out of the market over here in 2001 and 2. Because if we got into the market, we'd set the bar so high that the rest of the companies couldn't achieve that, and they couldn't sell their snake oil salesman stuff. So they sent the FBI, the DOJ, everybody at us.
Which is so fascinating for me, because on one hand, the economics are there. So corporate budgets are, equate to corporate power and those types of things. But every organization I come near is just drowning in lack of control of its data.
Yep.
And when I start speaking things that I've been trained literally by you, about data minimization and being very selective, with our AUDIA architecture, the automated decision intelligence architecture that we put together. It starts with the business impact. It starts with the reason you're doing this. And then the second step is to look at, well, what data sources are you going after? And already at that point to minimize.
Yep.
And then when you acquire the data, in a very controlled way, you can further, protect either pseudonymization or anonymization, obviously encryption and other, whatever technique, and perhaps even further minimization. Yep. But that's so counter to what people want to hear. I get looked at very oddly still, because I'm like, well, wait, why don't we just take it all and put it in, a giant data lake, and then you have it all. And you basically, because you're going to drown. This is not, if you build it, they will come. That has, I don't think that's ever happened in the history of data management. So you've been working on a project with the U.S. government that I think you can talk about a little bit around voter fraud. Yep. However, while that is also based on the architecture and the experience you have in the past, unfortunately, that also hasn't necessarily been bought. But can you just describe a little bit about what is the voter fraud problem you're solving, and how would you solve it?
Okay, from Judicial Watch's review of certain states, for example, they found that at a minimum of 3.5 million people registered to vote who aren't eligible to vote, according to somebody. I guess it's Social Security, I'm not sure. But they also found that in Los Angeles County in California alone, there were like 1.25 million people registered to vote that weren't eligible to vote. I assume most of those are illegal immigrants. But otherwise, there's this massive numbers. I mean, the president took a guess at 3.5 million. He took it from Judicial Watch, but I think the number is probably at least twice that. Just by my mathematical sense of things, I just think that that's only a very small sample, and it's not really the true outcome. Now, for us, we put together a way of validating and verifying all the voter rolls in the entire United States, and do it all as one package, so that you could compare Social Security, all of the people who have Social Security numbers, their ages and so on, their eligibility to vote and all of that, and validate and verify that as citizens of the United States eligible to vote.
Yeah.
In every state of the union. And of course, keeping one record would mean any person could only vote once in one polling station, and no other polling station would they be eligible to vote in the entire United States. Plus, you would eliminate all the dead people, because the dead people are on a dead list, and the Social Security has it public available, right? So you can use that to say this person is dead. So you don't get dead people voting like we have had, okay?
Yeah.
So all of those things are possible, and you compare that Social Security with the. By the way, I say this publicly, not publicly, but privately within government. That, by the way, as a part of that, you could include the census data from this year, and tell where all of the illegal aliens are.
Yeah.
Just because the Democrats think they're doing something positive when they get them to go out there and register with the census, but not say they're a U.S. citizen, so that the federal government will give the schools and what have you more money according to the numbers of people there. Well, so that would expose all of that.
Basically, you're talking about, or let me ask if you are talking about, what it sounds like you could be talking about is to have one national database of all the people in the U.S., or are you talking about taking all the existing data sources, correlating those together in order to essentially create a virtual database of everyone in the U.S.? I guess
it's actually the existing databases that already are held by government.
Yeah, and then bring those together. Now, okay, why would someone not want that to happen? Because it sounds logically very reasonable and smart to do, but it sounds like there's some politics and emotion there that maybe people don't want this to happen.
Yeah, that's right. And in fact, that's my sense too. And the reason, very simply put, is they're cheating.
Yeah, and they don't want to. They don't want
to get exposed.
Yeah. So it's no, one of the things I've loved about working with you, Bill, is you so casually speak at levels of data that are unimaginable to most people, and again, because of the way you look at these problems is to simplify them, flatten them, and so they are essentially infinite scalable, which I think is delightful. I think one of the issues that we faced as well is even my learning curve, having been in technology and software and data for quite some time before we met. It took me quite some time still to catch up to where you guys were operating and thinking, back at the NSA and also now. Do you think it could also be just a general knowledge of the possibilities of data amongst professionals?
Yeah, I think they tend to focus training of people coming up in the field in a certain way. Like think the latest technology, when in fact, like B+3 indexing technology of 70 years old, I guess it is now. That's the most effective way to deal with massive queries or massive amounts of data indexed and querying. So, and they don't think of ways of putting together a graph as the index as well as something else. Is to make something that you're designing, the fields and files that you're putting together and how you organize them to satisfy all of your needs, or as many of them as possible, rather than designing different things for different answers for different questions.
And just for the audience sake, can you describe what you mean by graph? Because I know you don't mean a pretty picture.
No, I don't. It's like it's of course, a B+3 indexing scheme. Where you index A to B and B to A is reversed index, so you only look down one field when you're doing queries to find answers. Mm-hmm. It's just an A. I call it mathematically A dot B, meaning A has a relationship to B. A can be the same or different than B, and the relationship can be anything.
And this is created essentially in a flat file, if you will. It's
right. Yeah.
Searchable. So
easy to update, easy to query, easy to get answers quickly to keep up with the speeds of electronic speeds of today's communications.
So something that I would love to do still, in my career is actually build a value creating solution based on the concepts that you guys brought from your background, because then we also mixed it up with some, very young and incredibly smart, data scientists of today. And then we had some, system engineering capabilities, which were incredible. Unfortunately, one of those people sadly has gone missing. Arian Komphaus has gone missing and is now presumed dead. And just a side note on that, the Norwegian police does not think that was least as far as I know, ill doing or bad work. It was maybe just an accident at sea, which was that Aryan was a genius on these things and extremely driven with his passion for privacy. So one of my dreams would be and this is for the listeners out there as well, that if you are a mid to large size corporate or mid to large size government agency, and if you are drowning in the manual analysis of your data, and you're looking for a very reasonably priced approach, architecture to it, as opposed to software, because pretty much if you buy software without knowing the thinking behind it, you're never going to get that software work for you anyways. It's my experience. Then call Bill, I think I would just be delighted to train it, because it is so incredibly valuable. What would you like to see, Bill, with because you're still, you're long retired, you're still out there solving problems, working with government agencies, trying to get the right things done. What are the next years of your career look like now? Basically still trying to pursue the dream.
Well, I just hope to be able to do wild and crazy things,
Okay.
The more the merrier. Yeah. I mean, when to give you an example, this was like 25 years ago. Well, almost 30 years ago. I started in the NSA. I was still working over there, and I said I wanted to, start to put together the entire relationship of all the phone interconnections in the world. Mm-hmm. And I pulled together a bunch of analysts. Yeah, I pulled together a bunch of analysts, and I figured, well, now it's a little more, but back then it was probably 2.5 billion landline phones, and maybe another billion or so cell phones or something of that nature, and now it's probably double that. Okay, but some of the people there at NSA, because of the mindset, if you see, the problem is if you take and have a mindset of the problem is infinite, immediately you've defeated yourself. You can't solve it because you can't get your mind around it. So my idea was, okay, at this little meeting, I was about 23 analysts in there from around the world, and I said, think of it this way. At any instantaneous point in time, freeze time, the numbers of atoms in the universe is finite. And this is much smaller than that. So now you can get your mind around it. Now you can start to solve it.
I have had the pleasure of you sharing that perspective with groups of engineers and data scientists, and it's almost like you can feel the shift in the room at a certain point when people go, kind of get this aha that, okay, this is manageable.
Yeah. And the other thing they miss, Chris, is the answers they're trying to get are verifiable in the data they've already got.
Okay, tell me more about that.
Verify that data within the data itself.
Tell me more about that for the sake of the...
Well, it's just, for example, Customs and Border Protection. Okay, Take that, for example. They have tens of thousands of people requesting or buying equipment or what have you around the world from all different countries in the world with all different languages of the world. So all of them, when they write down in the manifest what they're ordering or what company they're buying it from or what company they're shipping it to, they don't always spell it or do it the right way, or they abbreviate it or something like that. And that gets all kinds of variables. So in Customs and Border Protection, they thought that was really something that was different and separate because they did it differently. Mm-hmm. And they didn't figure that they could correct it. So they said, the data is the data. Well, I'm sorry, but that's a gold mine you guys have down there. You just don't realize it. All you have to do is start within the data, start to compile it, collapse it down to start with the common threads of phone numbers and addresses and stuff like that. And then you can collapse things down and see the abbreviations and the errors and the problems in the data and fix it. So you can actually fix the data at the same time. You validate it.
The way I describe that, probably inaccurately, is as you analyze and as you understand call it the raw data, the data is the data, but the raw data, you're actually building up an additional data set, which is sort of known replacements or known potential
aliases, for example.
Aliases. And then, of course, you never change the raw data, but then you essentially, create a new version of the data that has then been automatically self-corrected. And then over time, of course, that gets smarter and smarter. It takes some manual work up front, but the purpose of the manual work is to make the overall data set correct when you can't go back to the original source and, train, companies that are maybe even trying to, fool, Customs and Border Patrol.
Which we caught also by doing this.
Yeah. That's where I was going with it. So it's, and effectively it's, we were chatting a little bit before we started to record, but it's basically this giant feedback loop. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about that? What do you mean by the loop, the learning loop?
Well, the loop says you don't start out with just give me all the data. You start out by saying, what are the objectives of your business? What are your business objectives? What do you want to achieve? Right? Then you have to say, okay, what data do I have available that might help me satisfy that need? And then, so, the loop comes back from the beginning of what is your business all about and what are the things you need to achieve in it? And then what data will help you make that come to pass? Yeah. And the point is, not only do you have to select the data itself, but also select within the data the attributes that are reliable that you can make a decision on to automatically, again, or as much as possible automatically, fix data and also make assertions that you should follow to meet the business objective. So, it's all done in that loop. It's a continuous loop. And although our audio doesn't show that, we try to say that up front.
Well, and if people are interested in learning more about audio, then reach out to us, either myself or Bill. In the audio architecture, when you go down a little bit, 2 or 3 levels, it does have the learning loop in there. And the way I took that into my own work is with the business scan, the business canvas that the simplicity scan that I've come up with. On the left-hand side is, there's the business purpose, there's the customer, there's the product. And this is the thing that sort of should be the reason why you're doing what you're doing. Yep. And on the other side is actually the data. And, in my view, you should start in that order and go back. So we've got about 2 minutes or so left. And Bill, one of the we went on a lot of crazy adventures together. One of them was to Langley. And the most joyful, this might sound weird, but the most joyful part of our whole Langley experience was sitting in that little diner. I think I remember it to be cherry pie with
absolutely
with some it was just the traditional American cherry pie with the whipped cream, or there's ice cream on it. So. Yeah. But I'm almost scared to ask the question because it's such a long story, and then maybe we can link back to what there. But why were you in Langley as an NSA whistleblower? That seemed to be the last place we would find you.
Well, because we had proven forensically that the DNC emails were downloaded locally and transported physically to WikiLeaks for posting. We also proved that Gooseford 2 had to be a local download because of the speeds of transfer of data, and the speeds fit nicely with a thumb drive download off the computer or any kind of storage device download locally, but. It did not fit in the transfer across the internet, and we proved that. We went around trying it, and we threw it, saying if anybody knows how to do it, please tell us. We'll help you try it ourselves. But we're open to a peer review. If you think you can do it, come up and say so. And no one has said so. Not even NSA, CIA, or FBI. None of them. No. Well, the delightful part is then President Trump invited you to tell that story to the then director of the CIA, Mike Pompeo. Actually, it's not quite it, Chris. He told Mike Pompeo that if he wanted to know any facts about Russiagate, he should talk to me. Yeah. Now, I thought that was very damning of his agency as well as all the entire intelligence community. That was not a vote of confidence, at least not for them. It was certainly for you. So, Bill, we need to wrap up. My friend, thank you so much. How can people get a hold of you? Well, they can catch me on LinkedIn is probably the best way. So, Bill, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time. Thanks, Chris.
Learn more at ebullient.com/podcast.